Welcome to Innovation 19. I'm Daniel Lane Standig. Today we're talking with Cherie Silberman. She's an employment law attorney and the founder of Empath Employment HR Law. Her firm is focused on providing employment law counseling and advice, and she frequently provides harassment, diversity, and other employee training and conducts workplace investigations to identify and correct legal risks in the workplace. Welcome, Cherie.
Hi, Daniel. So excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, one of my first thoughts anytime I'm talking to somebody who works in employment law is just when you think about talent and how important talent is to a company, and then you hear the words human resources or employment law, it sounds so cold and corporate and old-fashioned. And yet you take an approach to really valuing talent. So how do you see employment law from your perspective and the role of it in a corporate marketplace?
You're absolutely right, Daniel. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with that, which is why I formed a firm just devoted to keeping employers compliant with employment law by focusing on those types of things. You cannot overlook the importance of a good workplace culture and having compliant policies in the workplace that kind of send the right message to your employees. Obviously, they need to comply with all the employment laws that are coming out and we anticipate will be rolled out this year. But when you think about the core focus on improving the workplace culture and having policies that are really helpful to the employee, I think you're going to do many things, including keep your company outside of the courtroom and away from some of these employment law risks.
So what is the legally approved definition of a good corporate culture?
Number one, you have to start with complying with the variety of employment laws. So, of course, all employers need to make sure that their policies and their practices comply with federal law, but you can't overlook the differences that exist in state and local law too. So that is your baseline, right? But when you have companies that want to stay competitive and they want to do the right thing by their employees and they want to make sure that they're keeping their employees in the workplace and not going to, the competitor or other companies, you need to make sure that you're providing different things that are above the minimum requirements. It used to be a couple of years ago having nap pods and foosballs and soft drinks available. That was kind of the thing to do. And it kind of, made people feel like this is the right workplace and I want to go to work. But it's really evolved more now. You can't just do that to enhance culture. You don't need a nap pod because you're working at home and you have a bed right there. So it's provided for you.
Nap anytime you want now. Yes.
So you need to provide benefits that are more meaningful. And, sometimes that's not just compensation or increase in pay. It could be a variety of different things. And we'll talk about some examples of those.
So you named your firm Empath. Tell me about that. I mean, you don't meet many people who work in law who really use the word empathy or empath or anything like this.
You're absolutely right. That is not the first thing you think. You would think, she just cares about the employees, which of course I do. But actually, my practice is devoted only to working for employers and businesses. And there are a couple of reasons for that. So the empath has a couple of meanings behind it, and I'm glad you asked. The EM is, representative of the employment or employer. The path is designed to get employers on the right path to, of course, stay compliant, but do all these things that we're talking about in terms of increasing and enhancing workplace culture and retention. And, the empathy is also meaning behind it as well. So in order to, and I think that's the future of the workforce right now.
So you were telling me before we started recording here that there was a survey that said that 4 out of 5 employees have responded positively to working from home. And about the same, 4 out of 5 companies intend to continue offering some remote work options indefinitely. So when you think about that from an HR perspective, and we have a lot of leaders and managers who are listening to this podcast, how do they start to think about managing and setting parameters for performance when you have this type of hybrid environment?
I think it's really important not to forget the importance of, high touch communications, and you have to build those into your daily routine. So don't forget all of the different features that exist. You can use technology, but you also have to understand there's a time not to use it. Mm-hmm. So I would even say, especially to leaders, to carve time out of their day to make sure that they're engaging personally, or they're having opportunities to have personal conversations or non-work conversations with their team members. because everyone has Zoom fatigue at this point, and there are great opportunities to use this technology. But sometimes, maybe carve out a day or carve out a portion of your day where you're just using telephone calls, or you're not using any technology and you have your employees who are just working on their projects. I think you can't forget the typical employee performance reviews that you need to perform, and also using technology to track employee performance. If you have metrics where you have employees who need to meet a certain number of calls or sales per day, you can still track that. You can track that very easily. You don't need to have them in your physical workspace to track that.
Do you feel like it takes more communication from a manager to manage a virtual workplace or virtual team, or is that not really true? At the end of the day, it comes down to how effective you are, not necessarily whether you're interacting more often.
I think it depends on the leader. It depends on the organization and the employee. So I think that managers need to understand what their employees are in terms of their needs. You've probably heard a lot about, millennials and the younger generation that need more frequent feedback. Mm-hmm. And I do find that to be true. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's, if you're making generalizations, which I'm an attorney and I'm trying not to make generalizations about age because I'm not trying to generate any age discrimination bias, but there's studies that show this, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. That's why I think you see the trend for the annual performance evaluation going away. You can't wait a year to hear how your performance is, right?
No way, yeah.
And the other thing is you need to have two-way feedback too. I think that it's only fair. So one thing I see in terms of, how frequent do managers need to have feedback or touch-ins with their employees, it's going to depend on the employee and in the culture. But I do think regardless, I'm a big proponent of doing more frequent feedback sessions, whether you're in a virtual environment or not, and also having two-way communications, because supervisors need feedback too.
It's so hard for supervisors to take feedback, and I've noticed over the years that there are some really talented managers and leaders who are so it comes so naturally for them to dispense of the feedback, but then when it comes to actually listening to the rest of the team and seeing how they're a part of the dynamic, that's tougher. So let's talk about some trends in HR and leadership in a lightning round here. I'm going to give you a trend. You give me 10 to 15 seconds of your opinion.
All right,
ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Creating bonus programs.
Bonus programs are great, but you've got to stay compliant and make sure that you're thinking not just with finances, but non-compensation, right? Things that are for well-being and employee growth.
Okay, next trend. You already used the word worker well-being. What does it mean to you?
Oh, worker well-being. It's not just physical, but mental, emotional well-being. And there are a lot of programs now. There are actually positions that are being created for employee well-being. So much to say about that, but I'm out of time.
Humans and bots in a new blended workforce. Good, bad, ugly.
Mediocre. You knew I was going to say that. You have to have both, right? And there are so many apps that you can use now to report harassment or other workplace complaints. And they design these bots so that they are responding to you in a neutral way intentionally, but there's no substitute for a human, so use both.
Most important soft skills for HR leadership or managers in general?
Empathy, and empathy. No.
It's in the name of your company. Okay, virtual reality for corporate training. Have you seen it done? Are you interested in it?
I haven't seen it done, but I've read quite a bit about it. So I think that it's great because there are studies that show there's a lot of interest in it and it's cost effective. But my bottom line is don't forget the human element to it. So utilize it, but actually have some human who can supplement it as well.
Recruiting for skills versus college pedigree.
Skills, any day. I think that education is important. You don't want an employee who's lied on their application, so there's that. But I think you need to look at employee ethic, work ethic, and experience over the name on the diploma.
Workplace experience, how do you think employees define it?
It's the opportunity to work for a company and work with employees that are like-minded and all have the same goal. but is a really rounded experience that's not just, part of their workday, but actually part of their being.
Best advice you've ever heard about managing through conflict?
Listen and be understanding that employees are going through something. A lot of times when they're not performing or they're not meeting expectations is to understand what it is so that you can actually craft a solution instead of just telling the employee what they need to be doing.
Politics in the workplace. Opinionated people who want to share enthusiastically their point of view.
Lawsuit.
Okay.
No, 2 words, one's concept. Stop it.
Okay.
No, you know what? You do have to recognize that some employees do have the right to speak about politics. There are some laws that protect political expression. Doesn't mean that you have to allow your employees to go around and carry signs and talk about and have difficult conversations about politics in the workplace. But when it does spill over and it creates emotional outbursts, you need to stop it.
There's so much new employee monitoring technology now, and there seems to be a lot of talk about ways that you can or can't monitor employee performance.
You can always monitor employee performance. You should have in your policy that the employee has no right to any expectation of privacy in company equipment and on their systems. So I always think you should monitor employee performance, but I don't think you should micromanage. I think that you should hire employees who you believe are going to perform their job and let them do that and give them the support they need to do that and monitor it, but I don't think you need to micromanage.
Absolutely. Okay, let's talk about recruiting and hiring, because attracting the right talent, especially in such a hugely competitive marketplace, especially around tech, this topic comes up all the time, and it's increasingly difficult to recruit the right people and keep the right people on your team. So a lot of companies are moving into using AI and technology. What kinds of issues and opportunities are you seeing around recruiting, hiring, and using technology to do it?
I'm a big proponent of using AI and technology in various different workplace decisions, including recruiting, with a grain of salt, or at least with some caution, because you can use these tools and they are I think they're very important and I think they're very helpful, but they can also lead to risk. And I'm not going to name names, but there have been some companies that have used, for example, face scanning technology. Mm-hmm. And there have been some concerns over the last few years that using this technology could actually result in a disparate impact on certain minorities, because the way that the technology is designed, there's no intention behind it to try to rule out any particular group, but that's just the result that happened. And lo and behold, recently there was a company that used this face scanning technology, and there were groups of individuals who were not hired and filed a lawsuit, and it turned out that yes, this tool actually had a disparate impact on minorities, which is obviously not something that any company wants to have.
So now you have workforces that are distributed, they're working in different states, they have different jurisdictions. How do you start to think about that from an HR perspective when you have a workforce that suddenly, in even a smaller, medium-sized company, crosses state lines so easily?
That's a great question. And that's something that a lot of companies were not prepared to deal with when COVID hit last year. So all of a sudden you have an employee who's on spring break and they can't get home and they're working in California, but you're based in Florida. And now you have to comply with all these California wage and hour laws and sick pay laws because they're physically located in California. So that's one thing that I think a lot of employers were not prepared for. Now 10 months in, we have an opportunity to really sit back and think, okay, what do we need to be doing here? So on one hand, I think it's great because they're remote workers, and for employers, it gives you a huge candidate pool that you didn't necessarily have access to before. So I think it's great from that perspective. I just think you need to be cautious and understand that it's not as simple as, oh, we can hire anyone anywhere. You actually have to comply with the various employment laws in that state or in that county or city. There are some localities that actually have higher minimum wages or sick pay or family leave laws that you need to comply with, even if they are assigned to your state or your locations.
In the past, you've worked with a number of different types of companies and leaders, large companies, small companies, leaders who are really experienced, new managers, etc. What are some of the signals that tell you in your first encounters that this is a company that's really going to be good to work with? They're really kind of buttoned up and ready to work with you.
When they understand the importance of, number one, treating their employees fairly, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it'll be better for the business. It's better for the bottom line. And also it'll help them with their goals. And they understand the importance of compliance, because a lot of times it's, we haven't gotten in trouble, or, the practice down the street does it the same way and they've never gotten sued. It's really, and I hope that happens, right? I hope that employers never get lawsuits and never get into trouble, or have a DOL auditor showing up at their workplace and saying, hey, we want to take a look at your payroll. But when they understand the importance of all of that, the good workplace culture, treating their employees right.
Absolutely. Well, I've seen a lot of companies that go through rounds of funding, and they will bring in new investors, and the business is going through an inflection point. The management team is really busy, they're dealing with growth, which is a wonderful thing. And they kind of, things just happen. They kind of have a blind spot around things like HR and making sure that the team is rowing in the same direction with them. So there must be certain points in a company's growth too, where it's just helpful to have an advisor and a partner in looking at these types of vulnerabilities.
Absolutely. And I love that. I'm actually really passionate about that, because I understand from the business perspective, you're excited about your product, your service, you're getting off the ground, you're getting funding, and you're not really looking at the compliance piece because you just feel like it's a stumbling block. If you've watched the sitcom, The Office, or, various different shows that depict the HR office as kind of the office of no, employment lawyers kind of have that as well, the no. I try to say, look, I will tell you where the risks are. I will give you red light, yellow light, green light. I will tell you. I understand there may be a time when I say, not such a good idea, and you go for it anyway. I'll help you. I'll at least tell you how to mitigate those risks, right?
That's great.
But so I really enjoy having the opportunity to come in, look at employment practices. As an attorney, I can do that with attorney-client privilege, which I think is always very helpful to have that. And then advise on what the risks are. Here are some really opportunities to get around it, and then help the company so that when they do grow, when they do go public, for example, then everything looks good, everything's buttoned up, and they're set up for success.
Nobody wants a deal to be held up by an HR problem.
No, exactly.
Or a lawsuit.
Exactly. Get that out of the way. Just stay compliant. Get your policies and practices in order, and then I think you'll be much better suited for success.
Best way for people to find you, if they want to work with you, they want to learn more about how they can work with Empath, what's the best way to find you and reach out?
The easiest way is probably on my website, which is empathlaw.com. It is EMPATH law.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, Cherie Silberman, but you'll never figure out the spelling of my name unless you go to the show notes, CherieSilberman.
Awesome. Cherie, thank you so much for being on this podcast.
Thanks so much, Dan. It was a lot of fun.
I had a blast. Thank you for listening to Innovation 19. Like many other podcasters, we're using Post by Cherie to create, publish, and optimize this episode. Learn more about why some of the world's top brands rely on Post to power their podcasts at futuremedia.com.